Om Stapakaya Chatarmasya Sarva Dharma Swarupine Avatara Virishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. O Ramakrishna, establisher of world religion and the embodiment of all religions, to thee, the noblest of divine incarnations, I offer my salutations. To Bengali devotees, I wish you Shubho Mahalaya. And tonight, of course, we are celebrating the birth of that great apostle of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Akhandananda, otherwise known as Gangadhar. And of course, his birthday always falls on this Mahalaya. So I'm going to use two books here, but one is a kind of overview. Is a book that is written, Apostles of Ramakrishna, by Swami Gambirananda. But principally, I'll be reading and referring to this text here, God Lived With Him by Swami Chetananda, a very comprehensive biography of all the disciples. There's a companion book, of course, They Lived With God, that is giving the biographical details of all the other non-monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. The reason why we celebrate these birthdays is it gives us a closer connection to Sri Ramakrishna himself, because all their teachings that they preached and taught were all really Ramakrishna's teachings, and they give very interesting personal glimpses of this great avatar, Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Akhandananda is an obvious saint. What I mean by that is, in the Irish traditional religious sense, because most Irish are Roman Catholic, with Roman Catholic religious and cultural upbringing, we'll be familiar with the process within that church of canonization. And when we examine the lives of the Roman Catholic saints, they have very much to do with a love of the poor, a love of service, and enacting that by selfless service to the poor. Of course, it's not just a Christian concept. We find in the Bhagavad Gita reference to those people of steady wisdom as being present for the welfare of all beings, not just people, by the way. But we find, particularly in Swami Akhandananda's life, this spontaneous compassion that has come out. So I'll give you a brief overview of his life, and then we'll pick up some details from this wonderful book from Swami Chetananda. Briefly, of course, Gangadhar was born in 1864 in Calcutta, but he was deeply religious by nature, and he was extremely orthodox as well. For example, he would have bathed several times, he would have cooked his own food daily, he would have been very familiar at a very young age with the Bhagavad Gita, and he meditated and did pranayama. His father practiced yoga. His father was versed in that, and his mother also was spiritual in her inclination. So it's no wonder that this young boy was brought up as he was, and later went on to be one of the shining stars that Ramakrishna had as one of his boys, if you like. That is, one of the youths that he saw great potential in, spiritual potential, instantaneously, of course, he saw it. It's a very rare example, by the way, because Gangadhar was immediately destined for monastic life. Noticing this and fearing this, his parents said, "We better marry you quickly." And he said, "All right, that'll just add another mother to the household." Realizing his attitude then toward all women, they abandoned the idea, and when he finally left as a wandering monk, his father sent his blessings, gave his blessings, unlike many of the other young boys whose parents resisted. So his whole youth was fertile ground, really, for this nurturing by this great avatar, Sri Ramakrishna. I will take this book now and elucidate a little bit on this, because this is the overview. But Swami Akhandananda gives wonderful details gleaned from all kinds of various sources. So he says he was a vivacious, handsome boy. When he was 8 years old, he had a large abscess between his eyebrows. He told the doctor to perform the surgery without anesthesia and memorized, and the doctor was amazed at his stoicism. Even at a young age, he was a born yogi. Gangadhar was extremely intelligent and memorized the Gita and the Upanishads. Somebody once asked Sri Ramakrishna, how did he know, how did he see, just from all the superficial indications of a person's potential and worth? And he said, well, you're only seeing this life. Me, I'm seeing the whole range of previous lives that went before. I have that kind of insight. So anyhow, Gangadhar was a close friend of Surendra Ghosh, who was a son of the famous follower of Ramakrishna and dramatist, the man of great bohemian nature and a giant, not only as a dramatist, playwright, but also, of course, as a great, great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, Girish Chandra Ghosh. And then together they formed a theatrical party. And here's something that we need to see as a kind of glimpse and insight into the intricate tapestry that is Akhandananda. Because we are told that Gangadhar took roles in several dramas and earned some repute as an actor. But his theatrical ability could not hold in check his deep spiritual inclination. At an early age, he was fascinated with the various wandering mendicants that came around and their stories and holy places that he had visited in India. And from his very childhood, therefore, he cherished a great desire to go to the Himalayas. And we'll see later in his life, he traveled so extensively, not only in the Himalayas, in India and the Indian side, but also in Tibet. And I would say he was one of the very first people to cross the border and not only go into Tibet, but learn the Tibetan language in a very short period of time. He happened to meet Ramakrishna in a companionship with his friend, but he had met Ramakrishna earlier. And in conversation with Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna asked him, have you met me before? He said, yes. At Dinadat Basu's house in Bagbazar, and seeing the master in Samadhi at that point, the young boy's spiritual longing increased. Sometimes he would go to the cremation ground and imbibe the mood of renunciation, we are told, by observing the impermanence of human life. And seeing Gangadhar's monastic tendencies, as I said, his mother was eager to arrange marriage, and we know the rest. An interesting thing about his childhood, at the age of 12, the young boy met a monk at the Sarvamangala temple in Kashipur and left home without informing anybody, without informing his parents. The spirit of renunciation he had. Of course, naturally, he left his parents distraught. They searched him for all over the place, actually in Varanasi, Vrindavan, Haridwar, all the holy places they could think of. Imagine. But of course, it turned out he didn't go very far. He only went about 60 miles from Kolkata and then returned home again. Of course, they were overjoyed. We're not told of all the details and drama that might take place in a household when that happens. But that was the spirit of the boy, even at the age of 12. And now we find him in Ramakrishna's presence. The initial encounter was very interesting. And we are told in May 1883, to be very precise, he was about 19 years of age. He visited the master in Dakshinaswara. As usual, the master welcomed him, received him cordially, made him sit on a small cot. 2 cots are there in Sri Ramakrishna's room. One he normally slept on, the other one he normally sat on. So he must have been sitting on the higher cot, and he got him to sit on the lower one. And then, of course, he asked him, have you seen me before? And the elder Gopal, whose birthday celebration we celebrated some weeks ago now, Swami Akhandananda, he was present and he was listening. And he said, yes, when I was young, I saw you once, when I was actually very young, he said. But anyway, so of course the master saw the fun in this, and he turns to the elder Gopal and he says, oh Gopal, listen to this. He says, this boy says that he met me when he was very, very young. This little one had an early boyhood because this young boy, Gangadhar, although he was 19, he looked much younger. He had very youthful looks. And so Gangadhar looked exceptionally young for his age, and also had a childlike demeanor as well. But what is interesting and gives us an insight also into the master is how he relates his own meeting. It reads like this. He says, in the afternoon, the master asked me to go to the Panchavati after saluting the deities at the Kali and Vishnu temples. And later in the evening, as I returned to the master's room, I heard music being played from 2 of the concert towers. And the temple garden was filled with the melodious sound of the Vesper bells. Now, just depart from the text again, because this is Swami Akhandananda relating this incident. And you can see by the way he's doing it that he is good at relating or narrating memories and stories. And later he was able to bring about all these colorful tales and stories of Tibet. And he was a wonderful conversationalist. You can see the style just in him relating this. The master's room was dark, he says, and there was a sweet smell of incense. The master was seated on his cot, barely visible. He did not have any outward consciousness. As he had asked me to stay overnight at the temple garden, I did so. The next morning, when I was about to leave for Calcutta, he said to me with a smile, come again on Saturday. Subsequently, of course, he decided to come more on the weekdays because Saturdays, Sundays were all busy times. Everybody visits Dakshinaswara on the day. And then, like other boys, he was able to be given individual tuition by the master. So after a few days, he says, I went to Sri Ramakrishna for the second time on a Saturday, and I was again made to stay overnight. You can see by now the parents don't really object to this. He took his pillow and sat down on the mat, and then he asked me to sit in a comfortable posture and to meditate. Now we have to bear in mind what he says next. It is not good to sit leaning forward or to hold body too straight, he said. Why would he say that? Because Gangadhar was extremely orthodox. And Ramakrishna sees this orthodoxy as an obstacle. But it's interesting to see how the master gets around it, because he doesn't want people to give things up. He wants people to question and then adapt according to a more reasonable position. So his technique of teaching is very interesting. We can imagine this young Gangadhar who has practiced pranayama and yogic practices, sitting straight as a ramrod. We will notice from Ramakrishna's own posture and meditation that his spine is both erect and relaxed. And he gives this advice. That evening, he says, the master initiated me by writing a mantra on my tongue. That evening, a few days after meeting him, seeing the worth in him. This was, of course, the master's unique way of giving mantra diksha. writing the mantra on the tongue and physically transferring, as it were, the very Shakti that was contained with him, that he was bubbling over with. He then lay down, putting his feet on my lap, and asked me to give him a little massage. I was quite strong, as I practiced wrestling. No sooner had I begun to press his feet than he cried out, "What are you doing? These legs will be crushed. Press them gently." And immediately I realized how soft and tender the master's body was, as if his bones were covered with butter. I was embarrassed and asked with some fear, "How then should I massage?" "Pass your hands over them gently," he replied. Niranjan also did like you at first. Now, Niranjan, of course, had a very manly kind of temperament, was physically very, very strong. They were all physically very strong, of course. But here is the rigidity of orthodoxy also. And so I think Ramakrishna was also teaching him to be more relaxed and also appealing to his sensitivity. So on weekends, many devotees would come to visit the master just in order to avoid the crowd, and Gangadhar would go on weekdays. Sometimes he would stay overnight. But of course, this enabled Sri Ramakrishna to imprint his way of life and teachings on the mind of every young disciple that was there. It's interesting once more to hear Gangadhar's reminiscences. I'm not going to read all of these passages, but those that highlight this insight into the master are worth reading. So he says, one morning, Sri Ramakrishna asked me to accompany him to the Panchavati, and there he told me to meditate facing the east. He left for a while, and when he came back, he set my body straight. You remember his previous exhortation and corrections in his previous meditation? You're sitting too straight. Now he wants him to sit straighter. And so he said, he set my body straight, he says. And he remarked, "You became a bit bent during meditation." We then returned to his room. After that, he asked me to carry a water pot and go with him to the Chadni, the bathing ghat and the Ganga. He had his bath and returned to his room in his wet cloth, what we call kolpak. Before he put on his fresh cloth, he asked me to sprinkle a little Ganga water on it. There was a picture of Mother Kali, of Kali Ghat in Kolkata, in his room, which he saluted. Then he ate a little dry prasad of Lord Jagannath and gave some to me. Standing in front of the picture of Kali, he said several times, "Om Kali." He then put the palm of his right hand on his chest with the 3 middle fingers, I suspect it was 2, touching the palm, and he stood there with half-closed eyes for some time. After that, he took the offered fruits and sweets that had been sent to him from the Kali and Vishnu temples. He then drank a little bell sherbet and gave me the prasad, after which he sat on his small cot and smoked from a hubble bubble. So we have to remember the orthodoxy of this young boy. And what Ramakrishna is saying, is conveying to him is, these orthodox ritual practices I also do. But we find later that gradually he changes what he calls old-fashioned practices. Now, when the food offering was over in the temples, the master took me to the eastern veranda of his room and said, "Go and take the prasad of Mother Kali." Now, the prasad of Mother Kali is non-vegetarian. But he could easily take the prasad from the Vishnu temple, which is vegetarian. And this young boy was vegetarian, orthodox. So you see how the master is teaching him. While walking through the courtyard, I looked back and noticed that the master was watching whether I was going to the kitchen of the Vishnu or the Kali temple. I wondered why he had asked me to go to the non-vegetarian kitchen of Kali instead of the vegetarian kitchen of Vishnu. I did what the master said, but I ate only the vegetarian dishes. I still remember the thick preparation of the chana dal, the lentils, When I returned to the master's room, I found him waiting near the east door with a betel roll in his hand, giving to me. He said, "Chew it. It is good to chew a couple of betel rolls after meals. It removes bad breath." Now, here's a person who his orthodoxy doesn't really like that too much. Sometimes I would think the master says that most of my habits, such as taking only self-cooked food, being a vegetarian, practicing austerity, and so on, are for old people. If they are not good, why shouldn't I give them up? So one day I visited the master and had prasad at the temple. A group of lay devotees came after his noon rest, and I spread a mat for them on the floor. One of them asked the master, "Sir, is it good that these young boys come to you to embrace the monastic life, disregarding the householder's life?" And now this is what I was saying in a generalized form, specifically what the master replied. He replies like this: "Look, you only see the present life and not their previous lives, in which they pass through these other stages. For instance, a man has 4 sons. One of them, having grown up, says, 'I shall not put oil on my body or eat fish. I shall eat only self-cooked vegetarian food.' The parents try to dissuade him from these habits and even threaten him, but the boy will not give up the path of renunciation. Yet the other 3 sons are set on enjoyment and swallow whatever they get. Look, it is because of the preponderance of sattva that this boy wants to renounce everything before he reaches manhood." So he listened to this, and his interpretation was like this: listening to this from the master, my faith in keeping up my orthodox customs doubled. He became more orthodox. So how to correct this? Sri Ramakrishna didn't want his young disciples to be stuck in the obsolete customs of an older generation. Yet at the same time, he did not want to disturb their faith. He didn't care for any kind of excessive behavior in practicing religion. He freed them from spiritual vanity. His way of teaching was simple and natural, and he knew how to make religion interesting. Very often today, people become anti-religious because they're forced into orthodox practices that they have no understanding what their meaning is, on the one hand. On the other hand, this is an age of science and increasing entertainment, Kali Yuga. So you have to make religion interesting. And you have to also make things compatible with modern science. You have to challenge the challenge. So he taught individually, according to the temperament of each disciple. The master was never dry or boring. He would make jokes even while speaking on the most exalted topics. Once, during the chariot festival at Balaram Basu's Kolkata residence, the master told Gangadhar and other young ones, "Well, my boys, sing and dance well. Then Balaram will give you a delicious sweet." He was a loving father to his disciples, as well as their friend. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna was always talking from his own experience, not through book knowledge or anything like that. And Gangadhar also later recalled. It's worth again reading. Once I spent a night at Dakshinaswar with several other disciples, and the master had us all sit for meditation. While communing with our chosen deities, we often laughed and wept in ecstasy. The pure joy we experienced in those boyhood days cannot be expressed in words. Whenever I approached the master, he would invariably ask, "Did you shed tears at the time of prayer or meditation?" This is a wonderful insight into Ramakrishna's experience. And one day when I answered yes to this, how happy he was. Now he says something very interesting. Tears of repentance or sorrow flow from the corner of the eyes nearest the nose when you are in repentance, when you're grieving, when you feel sorry. And those of joy, they come from the outer corners of the eyes. Suddenly the master asked me, "Do you know how to pray?" Now, this is a wonderful, wonderful question. Because When people sit in the evening or the morning for meditation, we call it, maybe we call it Sandhya. But what does that consist of? To the intense devotee, consists of prayer, japa, and meditation. Normally, we start in this order, and prayer will be the outpouring of a heart. Now, the outpouring of a heart requires the whole body to take part in it. And every religion has an area called charismatic prayer. The restraint of some religions is really restraining the emotions also. So if you're really expressive in your feelings, won't you use your entire body? This is how to pray. Let's have a look at what Sri Ramakrishna says. Do you know how to pray? That's his question. Saying this, he flung his hands and feet about restlessly, like a little child impatient for its mother. Then he cried out, "Mother dear, grant me knowledge and devotion. I don't want anything else. I can't live without you." This is the kind of prayer. Not treating God as a storekeeper. God is not an eBay source. We often think prayer is, requests. Please give me this, please give me that. And of course, in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, we find three kinds of devotees who pray. One is desperate. They know the capacity to give them what they want is beyond their personal limitations. And so they seek some help, some outside source help from the Emperor of the universe. Surely can do this. This is a legitimate prayer, but the Vedantin will say, please do this only now and then. If you love God, you won't bother him so much. Then the next is, I'm fine, but I need to improve. I need a better job or better circumstances. I need a better career or whatever it is. I need increased wealth, whatever it is. It's not that I'm in a desperate condition. I just need improvement. That's also legitimate. Once more, God has not a primary occupation of a storekeeper. But the finest one is the one who expresses just for the sake of doing it. So, same thing with this kind of prayer that he's putting. What should we request? Knowledge, devotion, and nothing else. And I'm desperate for it because I can't live without you, because you add to it, because you sustain my being. So while thus teaching us how to pray, he looked just like a small boy, because if God becomes our mother or our father, we become a child. And therefore, we actually have to be a child when we pray, if we have this attitude. And profuse tears rolled down his chest. It wasn't as if he was just making a demonstration of it. It was a practical expression. He was showing, but he was feeling it too. And profuse tears rolled down his chest, and he passed into deep samadhi. I was convinced that the master did this for my sake. One morning, Sri Ramakrishna took me to the Kali temple, and whenever I went there alone, I stood outside the threshold. But on this occasion, the master took me into the sanctum sanctorum, what we call the Garbha, and showed me the face of Lord Shiva. You see how Lord Shiva is placed lying down, prostrate, and Kali is standing on the top. From the outside, you can't see Shiva's face properly, so he took him inside and showed him the face of Lord Shiva. Of course, Lord Shiva is lying on his back while Kali stood over him, and his face was not visible from the outside. Where one could only see the top of his head on the outside of it, the master said, "Look, here is the living Shiva." Now he says, I felt that Lord Shiva was conscious and breathing. I was astonished how potent were the master's words. Up to that time, I had thought that this image was just like all the other Shiva images I had seen. One of the problems, I suppose, for popular Hinduism is you go into a shop, you'll see a picture of Lakshmi, Ganesha, Shiva, Parvati, all the gods and goddesses under the sun. You go to the street corner, a small temple is there. Everywhere you look. It could be that you become blasé about it. It becomes commonplace and the feeling of devotion doesn't arise in you. Familiarity breeds contempt is the saying. And so how seriously do we take it? Because all of these are opportunities. Whenever we see a picture, whenever we see a statue, these are all opportunities. It depends what we put into it. And whatever we put into it is what becomes what we see and what we feel. So the great lesson in devotion, that if we are using these for helping facilities, such as murtis and pratimas and those kinds of things, images and forms. This is a wonderful way, a wonderful avenue, a wonderful keyhole, if you like, toward the formless. We start off with this. But you see, we should see the infusion of the divinity within it. That will lead us through. And so, Sri Ramakrishna then gently pulled Mother Kali's cloth and placed her ornaments properly. And when we left the temple, he was reeling like a drunkard. He was escorted to his room with difficulty and remained for some time in samadhi. I cannot describe the details of that day. The joy the Master poured into my heart cannot be communicated. After coming down from samadhi, the Master sang many songs in an ecstatic mood. And although this is the celebration of Gangadhar's birthday, Swami Akhandananda's birthday, it is important. Why we study this, to reiterate, we're studying it to study the life of a saint. That life, well studied, will inspire us, will set a bar, a kind of ideal, to which we can live up to. Knowing our inadequacy, it doesn't detract from having an ideal. But the higher ideal still is the Master himself. And these personal glimpses are just invaluable treasures. One other incident I'll relate close by here, and then we'll move on. So one day at Balaram's house, Sri Ramakrishna told his would-be monastic disciples, I spit upon lust and gold. Those who are attached to them will never have God vision. He repeated this several times to establish this idea in their minds. Another day in Dakshinasara, a beggar came to the Master's door and asked for some money. The Master called Gangadhar and, pointing to 4 paise, asked him to give them to the beggar. When Gangadhar had done this, the Master said, wash your hands with Ganga water. This incident indelibly impressed on Gangadhar's mind the idea that money is rubbish, dirt. A true monk should be free from lust and gold. Later in life, he wandered some 14 years in art all over India as a penniless monk, never touching money. We have to be careful now in relating this to just reiterate, this is an ideal. It's not really for householders to say, oh, what a pity, we should also renounce. No, there's a different formula for the householders. So I emphasize this is for the monastic disciples. And Akhandananda was indeed one of these. One non-dualistic devotee came to see the Master and questioned how this great non-dualistic Brahman can ever manifest as a divine incarnation. It's a legitimate question often asked by non-dualistic people. If all of this is only one without a second. Swami Vivekananda as Naran also brought this argument up, by the way. But see how Ramakrishna answers it. The power is incarnate somewhere. First of all, before he says that, he says, the divine incarnation is an embodiment of his power. The power is incarnate somewhere, a quarter somewhere else, a half, and very rarely in full. And then he says something very interesting and insightful. He says, he in whom the full power is manifest is adored as Purna Brahman. That is the full Brahman, like Krishna. Now, he who comes as Rama, he who comes as Krishna, is here as Ram. Krishna says Ram Krishna. So the fullness is there in him also. And 3/4 of the divine were manifested in Rama. To this, one of the gentlemen said, Sir, this body is the root of all evils. If it can be destroyed, all trouble will cease. Another position. But Ramakrishna is familiar with these positions because of his teaching from Totapuri, the epitome of non-dualism. And so see how he answers, very interesting. He says, the raw earthen pots, when broken, are made into pots again, but the burnt ones, once broken, can never be remade. So if you destroy the body before the attainment of self-realization, you will have to be reborn and suffer similar consequences. But sir, the gentleman objected, why does one take so much care of his body? The master answered, those who do the work of molding preserve the mold with care till the image is made. When the image is ready, it doesn't matter whether the mold is kept or rejected. So with the body, one has to realize the supreme self. One has to attain self-knowledge. After that, the body may remain or go. Till then, the body has to be taken care of. Of course, that takes off all the arguments, and the gentleman was silenced. Now, just in terms of the orthodoxy, do you practice the Brahminical rites daily? The master asked one devotee. Actually, he asked a follower of Keshav Chandra Sen. I do not like all these rituals, he said. You see, the master went on, do not give up anything by force. This comes to my earlier point. If the blossoms of gourds and pumpkins are plucked off, their fruits rot. But when the fruits are ripe, the flowers fall off naturally. Do you believe in a God with form or a formless God? In a formless aspect, he replies. But how can you grasp the formless aspect all at once, says the master. When the archers are learning to shoot, they first aim at the plantain tree. This is quite broad. And then after that, the thin tree, then at the fruit, then at the leaves, and finally at a flying bird. First meditate on the aspect with form. This will enable you to see the formless later. This reply solves many, many practical problems for the devotees. And particularly, I would say, Western devotees who don't often see the value of God with form or a personal chosen ideal that will provide it. All right. Let's take a broader view now. So I come back to how Gangadhar had met Ramakrishna. He met him with Harinath, who became Swami Turiyananda. And when he first saw the young person, of course, he enabled this young boy to be charmed. With every visit, he was charmed. And he was charmed by newly found phase of God intoxication that he saw each time. Witnessing it first time, in terms of his oldishness, this is how Ramakrishna cured him. He said, I want you to meet a very wonderful, wonderful boy, a great devotee. His name is Naran. And Naran was the most unorthodox person you could ever imagine. He was a great rebel. He didn't believe in all these rituals and so on and so forth. He was the most unorthodox person you could imagine. And so he met this wide-eyed boy with these beautiful, stunning, hypnotic kind of eyes, powerful eyes. And he saw how Ramakrishna was saying, look, this is a boy who doesn't have to renounce all these things. He doesn't have to go in for orthodoxy. but their renunciation is inward. He has no attachment to them. So from there on became a lifelong companionship journey for this young boy. And he became close friends, probably closer than most of the other disciples, with Naran or Vivekananda. And this was one of the two turning points in his life. That says something about his personality. Apart from him being extremely adventurous, and we see that in his wanderings in Tibet and his willingness to go without a plan or a compass or a map into territory with pure faith in Ramakrishna. Some of his journeys, I don't want to know where I'm going. Ramakrishna will guide me. Here's a path. Lord, you take me there. This kind of approach he had in his wandering days. But he was desperate to be with Vivekananda. And Vivekananda's attitude changed his life on the one occasion. Second occasion was this other aspect of his personality. Even from a young age, he was known for his giving his clothes to the poor. And he was known for his compassion for the poor. This compassion came out in his wandering days. Initially, he didn't really see when Swami Vivekananda made the statement, I have wandered the length and breadth of India, and worship of God is worship in the poor, worship in the uneducated, worship in the downtrodden, worship in the helpless. Worshipping God in man is the highest thing we could do. He didn't fully understand this, even though he had inherent compassion. And then he fell sick in Khetri in Rajasthan. And since the Maharaj of Khetri was there and was a great devotee of Swami Vivekananda, he recovered there. It was in that place that he came across so many people of diverse backgrounds, rich, poor, in good circumstances and otherwise. And this stirred up his inner fire of inherent compassion that he had. If we were to write a CV for Swami Akhandananda, it would be extremely impressive. I have a list of things that should go on there. At Khetri in 1894, of course, he had a burning desire for the poor and the helpless masses. But in 1894, at the Maharaja's court, he persuaded the royal courtiers' children that they should be educated, because the first point in uplifting the poor would be give education. So it was a strategic move, albeit compassionate, but he saw that the first step must be education. This is, of course, completely in line with Swami Vivekananda's vision. Sister Nivedita came, established education for the girls, but it was Swami Akhandananda who paid full attention to the boys. And so he increased the high school attendance from 80 attendees to 257 and improved the teaching staff. He started 5 primary schools for village boys. He managed to persuade the Maharaj of Khetri to sponsor to the tune of 5,000 rupees. He established, or there was already a Sanskrit school in Khetri, and he converted this to a Vedic school. He raised subscriptions for all the books and educational material and arranged distribution because the boys that attended the school were the poorest of the poor. And the Maharaj was persuaded to lift the ban on the poorer subjects from the annual Durbar, an opportunity, to meet with the people, but the basic lower strata of society were excluded from it. And then he came across the Bills, the native tribes there, and he fed them. He gave them a marvelous feast. For a whole day, he gave it to them. And he founded Middle English schools. He established helpful societies in their region regarding social, religious, and educational affairs. And then in 1897, cholera outbreak, he nurses the cholera patients himself. the echoes of Sister Nivedita doing it in Kolkata without any kind of concern or reservation for his own well-being. The Roman Catholic propensity for creating saints would be so impressed with this curriculum vitae, as it were. Then he attends to the famine. His first encounter with the famine takes place. He encounters a Muslim girl in tears because her pitcher is destroyed. And he goes, and he only has a few coins, and he purchases a pitcher and gives it to her. And with the rest, he buys food for all the old women who are around there and nurses some of them. And then he appeals to the Ramakrishna monastery, which is now relocated from Baranagar to Alambasa. And he says, please, I need help. I need famine relief. And the first time the Ramakrishna mission sends famine relief, this is the occasion. He established his 2 centers at Mahula and Panchgaon. But his star achievement, he establishes, he manages to have orphans around him, 2 orphans he takes care of, and this develops more and more. And he establishes an orphanage, firstly in rented properties. This is in Sargachi. And then the premises shifted there after 13 years of being there, shifted there to a new place, its own ownership in 1913. He establishes a day and night school for boys and adults and an outdoor dispensary. And then for 10 years, a vocational training center or training school was there, successfully producing star pupils. And unfortunately, this discontinued after 10 years due to lack of accommodation. In his schools, he had model education. Not only was there general education, but prayers were said, spiritual training was there, the Ramayana, Mahabharata epics were taught, and even Muslim boys attended the school, and they were encouraged to learn about their own religion, Islam. And he got all these pupils also to get involved in service and cholera relief themselves. In Bihar, the flood relief was attended for 50 villages, and he nurses all the cholera patients. And he does the same thing at the age of about 70 or so in his elderly years for the earthquake victims there in 1934. So he was somebody who is extremely adventurous, compassionate, disciplined, but also flexible, because the second impact from Swami Vivekananda that changed his attitude was this service to the poor. He bought completely into Swami Vivekananda's mission and his vision and pioneered from grassroots this social service activity. He was highly disciplined, wandering from here to there on foot through many, many thousands of kilometers. He was one of the first, I think, Indians to cross the border into Tibet. He learned Tibetan in a very short period of time, as I said before, and spent many years in Tibet, had many, many adventures, would captivate audiences with his stories of Tibetan life and his adventures and experiences there. So he was thoroughly devoted to Swami Vivekananda. In his wandering days, when a group of the monks had met up, and he also wandered, by the way, he left Baranagar monastery along with Swami Vivekananda, wandering to the Himalayas. He had a great love for the mountains. But he also permanently left, or not permanently, but left without notifying anybody, the Baranagar monastery, and went on his way wandering. But at some point, Swami Vivekananda expressed the idea, I want to wander by myself. I don't want your company anymore. I don't want anybody's company anymore. Such was the love that he had for Swami Vivekananda. He couldn't bear the separation. Of course, by the way, Gangadhar was one of those at Anpur who took formal monastic vows there, having been given the ochre cloth by Ramakrishna previously. And when he left in his wandering days, he just took that cloth that Ramakrishna had given him. And so he sees if he can follow Vivekananda. He wanted, wherever Vivekananda was said to have gone, he went. And every time he went there, he found Vivekananda had gone on before him, gone on. Eventually, he caught up with him. And Vivekananda said, thank you, yes, but you now go our separate ways. And of course, he required that because it was during his wanderings that he got this revolutionary compassion, this movement of his heart that changed the whole direction of traditional monastic life. So that was the second occasion where Naran changed his life, but if he hadn't been flexible to it and accommodating, he wouldn't have been able to change. So he had a changeable temperament. He had incredible memory. He could memorize anything you like. Incredible language skills. He could pick up languages very quickly, learning Hindi, learning Tibetan, and so on. And he organized the first rate. He was organized, as we have seen, but he was also a first-rate conversationalist because he had such a wide range of subjects. He was a lover of books on diverse subjects, but he was also a Vedic scholar, quoting at random, almost, the Sanskrit traditional texts. And he had a great love of fun. All of them had, because this is how Ramakrishna taught them. And one of the hallmarks of spiritual life and saintliness is this great sense of humor that is there. And often the fun was at his expense. Often the fun was at other people's expense. When he went to the Udbodhana office as vice president, he was made vice president eventually of the whole movement. The young brahmacharis cajoled him, oh, come on, give us some sweetmeats and so on. We know, buy us some and give it to us. And he said, what? Where's the money? And they knew he carried money. Of course, he brought money specifically to purchase that for them. And they said, oh, what about here? And then he goes to Swami Akhandananda complaining, these boys, you see, they just want me to buy these rasgullas and so on and so forth. And then, of course, they all had a big joke, you see, and he enjoyed this. And of course, the money was already there, and they all enjoyed these rasgullas. He was also a forceful writer. And not only that, but he was a rare but forceful speaker. We can start finishing off by quoting from a speech that was delivered at the 7th of April final session of the 1926 First Convention of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission. It was, of course, held by that time at Belur Math. And so it's worthwhile reading his speech. The convention closes its sessions today. This is therefore the last occasion to speak to you in assembly. The wonderful life of the God-man Sri Ramakrishna, the magnetic spell of whose hallowed name and teachings has drawn you all together here. The underlying stories of this unique manifestation, his unprecedented renunciation, his unfathomed love, sympathy, and toleration, and above all, his infinite moods of spirituality. These and such other aspects of the Master's life have been dwelt upon and interpreted by so many speakers in so many ways, and will continue to be so done. For how long, who can say? But in thinking of him, the idea that comes uppermost in my mind today is that the moment one saw him, one became transported to a spiritual elevation before which all distinctions and differences vanished. And even now, if one could sincerely meditate upon the life or seriously think over and understand the true spirit of his harmony and toleration, one could no longer afford to cherish any bigoted or controversial ideas. Sri Ramakrishna was never for a moment heard to renounce anyone because of his religious belief or profession, if only he were sincere. He took man at his best and always gave him a lift from the plane where he stood. What's the point in a sainthood or a spiritual person or holiness if the person by his presence or words cannot raise a person's joy to a higher level, raise their spiritual inward movement upward, raise them to a point of increased rapture? If there was anything which he was never tired of denouncing, most emphatically, it was hypocrisy. I remember one day a man denied the idea of the existence of God before him. And mark you what the master, who was ever so deeply absorbed in ecstatic communion with the Divine Mother, said to him in reply, "Well, who told you that there is a God? I would not ask you to believe in any such idea. And then you cannot with reason deny that there is a power working behind the universe." What a wonderful, wonderful response to a modern day atheist even. There's no God. You get into a debate. Is there a God? Is there no God? There's no God. I don't believe in such a thing. Who said there was such a thing? I never said it. But you have to admit, some power, some energy stands behind the universe. It's a very appropriate theme for today's Mahalaya, because it's celebrating some power behind the universe that deigns to come to our level, so to speak, and be an inspiration for us to do internal battle with jealousy, pride, anger, greed. So he says, I would not ask you to believe in any such idea, but then you cannot with reason deny that there's a power working behind the universe. One may attribute any name to it, but it remains there all the same. You can call it God, you can call it anything else. Why not take it in that spirit and try to know more intimately what you believe in? I find modern day atheists say, we don't believe in God. But then if you ask, well, what's your worldview? What's your explanation? How do you think things are? And it turns out they're agnostic about it, not having a specific worldview, maybe hypothesizing some random chance somewhere. So know this and be happy. To be sure, mere belief cannot give rest to your inner cravings. Knowledge, true knowledge of the mysteries of this phenomenal existence alone can do that. The same attitude of universal tolerance and sympathy for all, irrespective of their religious beliefs and social or spiritual standing, we find manifested in Swami Vivekananda, and upon us also, the humble disciples of the Master. The full implications of this idea began gradually to dawn. The Master and the Swamiji are really one. The one spirit, as it were, manifested in twin personalities. What we find in the Master in the form of a seed becomes fully developed in Swamiji. Swamiji, when we say Swamiji, we mean Swami Vivekananda, is to Sri Ramakrishna what the commentary is to the Vedanta Sutras. The one is complementary to the other. They are in fact inseparable, the obverse and the reverse of the same coin. You know, the Upanishads are not arranged systematically. These are profound but sundry and abstract ideas and require some systematization. It is the Brahma Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras, as we say, from Vyasa, that puts a system to it. And here, what is he saying? Ramakrishna is the Upanishad, and Vivekananda are the sutras, the explanations. Sri Ramakrishna one day cried aloud from the housetop for those young spiritual seekers who were to come to him and pour forth their lives' offerings on the altar of his service. And they came. But that cry has not ended there. It is still ringing through the air and shall continue for eons. Many have come after that. Many are still coming. and many more would come in the future. This address, as vice president at that point, would have been tremendously inspiring and is still inspiring today, because it's still true today. That call is still there. And as a Vedanta society, that call is there within the Vedanta society. And every member of every Vedanta society should be keen to broadcast that message and broadcast that voice. After all, it's the voice of freedom. Of course, eventually, Swami Akhandananda and the passing away of Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, becomes the president. Initially, he is reluctant to give Diksha, maybe through humility, but ultimately gives Diksha and spends his time between his orphanage, doing simple things, tending the gardens, administering the property, looking after things, and Belu Mat, between the two. So by his very life, we can see his practical input and his love of this work of this orphanage. So in 1934, of course, Swami Shivananda passes away and Akhandananda becomes the president of the Ramakrishna Order. And as I say, he spends his life going between this and during this period attends to the relief in Bihar that is from the devastation of the earthquake there. Now, this is still, you see, within the realm of the British occupation, if you will. And we can see how, even during the British reign, this social activity is taking place by Indians for Indians. Akhandananda replies to a question, on whom shall I meditate first, the form of the Guru or the form of the Ishta, the chosen deity? Where shall I concentrate? I'm now seeing Swami Akhandananda as the president, therefore as the teacher. Sri Ramakrishna, he replies, is the Guru and he is the Ishta, both. There is no first or second about it. The heart is the best place for concentration. Think that you are seeing him face to face. He is seated in your heart. Those who are initiated can think of their own Guru in the beginning, if it helps them. There is no hard and fast rule. The only thing needful is constant recollectedness of the Lord. Another time a devotee asked him if he had seen God. Akhandananda humbly replied, yes. While I was in the Himalayas, I saw God face to face. At the end of November, Akhandananda returned to Kolkata, and then on 3rd of December 1934, he went to Sagachi, and Sri Ramakrishna's centenary celebration was scheduled for February 1936. And 19th January 1936, Mrs. Josephine MacLeod, one of Swami Vivekananda's most prominent devotees, went to this ashram and said to the Swami, give me your message for the coming centenary. Swami Akhandananda replied, I have no message of my own, but I received this message from the Lord. I am infinite and eternal. What is my centenary? Miss MacLeod said, all right, I shall take this message with me. On February 1937, a cable was sent to Belu Mat to inform the monks that Akhandanandaji was in a serious physical condition. 2 monks arrived from Belu Mat the next day, and with the local doctor's approval, decided to take the Swami to Calcutta for treatment. As Swami Akhandananda was carried on a stretcher to the railway station, some farmers on the street tearfully said to him, Father, get well soon and come back. Akhandananda blessed them with a smile, and the train left at 5 p.m. He fell unconscious on the way. The train arrived at Calcutta 11 p.m. He was first taken to Udbodhan by ambulance and then to Belu Mat at midnight via Dakshinaswar. His bed was made ready next to Vivekananda's room. Several doctors tried their utmost to save this great soul. At last, at 3:07 p.m. on February 7th, 1937, Swami Akhandananda passed away age 72. His body, as along with many of the other disciples, was cremated on the banks of the Ganga River, close to the Swami's temple, Swamiji's temple in Belumat. To see God in all beings is the culmination of the Vedanta experience. Swami Akhandananda had that experience, so he served all as God. A few years before his passing away, the Swami told a monk his life's philosophy. The Master has still kept me alive for his work. Distribute yourself among others and bring other souls within yourself. You will see how much joy you will get from it. On the other hand, if you're always busy about yourself, you will be entangled within yourself. You will kill yourself and will die. Not knowing the self is akin to suicidal death. He was quoting here from the Ishu Upanishad. The more you disseminate yourself among the people, the more you will attain bliss and will lead you to self-realization. Now, due to time, we have to finish off. But before his passing away, none of his predecessors had been able to attend the Durga Puja. And so he at least erected a pandal and made the comment, well, at least I've seen that much. So he never himself got to witness that as well. But he was keen to see what the meaning of something so prodigious was his memory. There was a quotation in the Prabhupada Bharata in 1927. There was an article entitled Neo-Hinduism, and it ran, of course, as follows. So, na tauham ramaye rajayam na sagam. I do not covet earthly kingdom or heaven or even salvation. The only thing I desire is the removal of the miseries of the afflicted. So the idea expressed in the couplet was so much after the Swami's heart that even after the lapse of 10 years, 1927, on the eve of his departure from this world, he wanted to know its precise reading. Of course, the teachings of such a great soul are also very important. We won't have time to go through the teachings, but I'll pick out one which is of significance. In being asked what kind of tapasya we should do, this is a question we all get asked at some point. People are thinking of elaborate rituals, or people are thinking, and he himself said, oh, I don't know much about rituals. He who used to be so orthodox now dismisses all those rituals. But one thing he says all of us can do, and we can do it continuously, is the practice of japa, the repetition of God's sacred name at every moment of the day, whatever we're doing, wherever we're doing it. Everybody at least can do that. Some people can't meditate or find it difficult. Some people can't concentrate their mind on God because of various activities. But everybody can consciously and also unconsciously repeat the japam, call on God constantly. In the words of my own guru, 24 hours of the day. So this is the life and a little glimpse into the personality of this wonderful saint, this great shining light that was one of the lamps lit from that great enduring light called Sri Ram Krishna. So our salutations to him and our thanks for that inspiration. And we finish off just by saying peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.